Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about UConn possibly joining the Big 12 would be a very interesting thing for basketball, would be something for football that we'd have to wait just a little bit for, I believe till 2031. So definitely something that'll be a little bit more drawn out in the college football side, but still something that is going to be very important about the future of all college sports going forward. But let's get into week 0. We'll close the book on week 0 today. I wanted to get into what did we learn in week 0 because there are a lot of overreactions going around, a lot of people going crazy about Florida State or SMU or Georgia Tech, and I kind of just want to find the middle ground of what we actually learned, what we thought we learned, and kind of differentiate between the two. But let's get into this real quick, and I think the biggest thing that came out of that Florida State-Georgia Tech game, and it was on the Florida State side by a mile to me, the most important thing was they have a coaching and motivation problem at Florida State, and it's not necessarily a glaringly obvious one, and frankly, it's not one that can't be fixed, because going forward, you can totally change your tune. You can make sure that you're not necessarily pushing the same buttons you pushed on this past weekend to make sure your guys are ready. But at the end of the day, these guys were not ready to play. Plain and simple. Whether it's from a coaching perspective, whether it's a game plan, whether it's motivation going onto the field and just desire to play, none of those things were in play for Florida State this past weekend. They played straight up bad for pretty much the entirety of the game, and there's a couple of different things that could be happening here. Whether it's the coaches just don't really know how to properly motivate this team with all of the new players and all of the different changes, or possibly worse, frankly, possibly worse is they just don't know the personnel they have. They're not fully confident in the group that they have. And this was a big topic of conversation around that D-line in particular, because it was called by Pete Thamel and a couple of different NFL reporters and things as the best defensive line in the country. And it didn't look that way on Saturday. And I don't think these people were outright lying or saying that, or trying to be biased in any way. I think they just saw athletic freaks, because you look across that defensive line, those are 4 athletic freaks. I can promise you that. But at the end of the day, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win a ton of football games. So the scheming part of it was left a lot to be desired on Saturday, where you had a lot of these elite athletes. You had a lot of fantastic players, even on that defensive line. It doesn't mean you don't have to scheme them open. It doesn't mean you don't have to make sure that they're running stunts, that they're getting a little bit more dynamic in their pass rush in the way that the offensive line sees them. And they didn't do that throughout the entire day. It felt like they just kept kind of plugging away at, we're bigger, we're stronger, and we're going to make something happen at some point, and it never happened. So I think the motivation problem is one that can easily be fixed, because now the motivation flips to you're fighting for your life. And we'll see what happens throughout that next couple of weeks for Florida State. But it's definitely going to be really interesting to watch that. The coaching problems might be a little bit harder to overcome, because you got to fix a lot of things on the offensive and defensive side of the ball when it comes to play calling, or it's going to look a lot like that throughout the season for Florida State. And then the other thing I learned was the portal just wasn't as kind to Florida State this year than it was in past years. And it's not like they took this monumental step back, but it was enough. There's no doubt about that. In the years past, they brought in Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, Trey Benson, Jordan Travis. They brought in, on the defensive side, brought in Jared Verse, brought in Braden Fisk. They've done incredible things on both sides of the ball in the portal. And I think they got good players this time around. I think DJU is a good player. I think Malik Benson is a good player. I think Roydell Williams is a good player. I think Jalen Brown is a good player. The thing is, Florida State can't do good. They have to have great players out there. They have to have elite players out there if they want to do what they claim they want to do this season, which is go to the ACC title, win it, leave no doubt, get into the playoff, and then possibly make some noise. And all of that stuff is technically still on the table. If this is the Florida State team we're getting all year, there's no chance they get to that point. But at the end of the day, I think there were a lot of people, burying Florida State, saying there's no way they come back from this. And don't get me wrong, I have my big-time worries about this team going forward. But I think the two things that you really learned is there's going to be some coaching changes in terms of personnel and in terms of play calling that just have to happen. And these guys that you got through the portal just aren't quite as talented as the ones that you had before. And maybe that's another coaching thing. You have to pick up the slack through scheme and through design. So it'll be really interesting to watch that. But moving on to Georgia Tech, Brent Key has made all the difference in this program since he showed up. And this has been a thing really since he stepped into that interim head coaching role back 2 years ago, where they, I believe, were 0-4 going into his tenure, or maybe 1-3. They went 4-4 the rest of the way, and that doesn't sound crazy, but it was quite the flip for that team, and it's continued on. And I think the biggest thing that you took away from that game was, honestly, after the game, Georgia Tech got on the mics for ESPN and was doing all the interviews and everything, and there were very, very few people in that team, and frankly, maybe even no one on that team that talked about any of their personal accomplishments. They all talked about how we're one of 20, we're one of 120, we all play together, we all play for each other, and that's the mantra of this team, and that's the reason that they walk onto a field with a team like Florida State that is bigger, that is faster, that is stronger, that is more talented, and do not get phased, because they know it's not just me out here. It's 119 guys right behind me, and it's going to be incredible to watch this team, because I think that's the biggest thing I've noticed is just a total mentality shift in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's showing on and off the field in recruiting right now. And then the coordinators have totally elevated this Georgia Tech team. There's a world where they're going to play a number of games this year where they're the least talented team on the field. They don't have the athletes that the other team has, but they're just going to out-scheme the other team. With Buster Faulkner on that offensive side of the ball, absolute superstar. And then Tyler Santucci on defense did just an incredible job getting at DJ throughout this game with blitzes and coverages just to confuse everything on the offensive side of the ball for Florida State. So you look at both these guys, I would not be surprised at all if they were head coaches in the very near future. I think Buster Faulkner, in fact, he turned down a couple of head coaching jobs this past offseason. I think a good one's coming for him this offseason, because this guy is an absolute superstar and is going to put on a show throughout this entire year. So overall, the biggest difference for Georgia Tech compared to the last couple of years is just they got the coaches. They got the guys in that building that know exactly what they're doing, have a very strict identity, and don't go away from that by any means. So very, very huge shout out to them. It felt very obvious that the coaching staff was just miles better than Florida State's on Saturday. And then moving on to SMU, they played Nevada on Saturday, and they had some issues. There's no two ways about that. And the biggest one for me is this team has a discipline problem on that field. There's no two ways about that. I mean, you walk out into a week 0 game where you're playing a Nevada team where you know that if you just execute your game plan, go about your business, you're going to win. You are more talented. You have so much more going for you that the only way that you lose this game, the only way that they stayed in this game was if you keep them in, and man, did SMU keep them in this game. They had 11 penalties, 125 penalty yards, and a lot of them were just stupid. There was a guy lining up on a play, and he decided it was the right time to spit on another player. That's going to get you a penalty. Believe it or not, that is going to get you a penalty, and it's one of those things that has kind of happened for Rhett Lashley throughout his career, where his teams are just missing that extra thing, missing that discipline part of their game that could take them over the top, and there's plenty of ways to fix that throughout the year, but as of right now, this looks like a team that might just hand a couple of teams games throughout the year. And then the quarterback position, because you got to find one and just stick with it. Frankly, I do think it's Preston Stone. I think that's going to be your guy going forward, but it could be Kevin Jennings. At the end of the day, you just got to pick one, because you walked out there on Saturday and started rotating these guys every single series. That is not a way for any quarterback to get in a rhythm. There's no quarterback on planet Earth that would be able to get into a rhythm going out there one drive and then sitting for 20, 25 minutes, going back out there for another drive. That just does not work. Now, there is a way to work in both quarterbacks, whether it's Kevin Jennings being your outright starter. I'd be more on board with that, because maybe he's the best guy for it. At the end of the day, just pick the best guy and move forward. Now, Kevin Jennings could still very much be in this offense, whether it's different packages, running packages, that type of thing. He absolutely can still be a factor. You cannot put him in for an entire drive and then expect Preston Stone to come right back on the field and start slinging the ball around. That's just not something that's going to be able to be done, especially for college quarterbacks. So at the end of the day, they just got to find a guy. I think it's going to be Preston Stone going forward, and they have a game this week against Houston Christian to maybe work out some of that at the end of the day. But overall, I do think it's going to be Preston Stone. But even if it's Kevin Jennings, just let it be Kevin Jennings. Do not bounce back and forth. Do not, make this wishy-washy and confuse everyone and make your offense much less dangerous than it can be with just one quarterback. Call the offense for that quarterback and move forward from there. So it's going to be incredible to watch this team develop, especially because there were quite a few issues on Saturday that just need to be fixed, plain and simple, before they get into ACC play, or they're in quite a bit of trouble this upcoming year. But Week 1 or Week 0 in particular is a hard one to gauge. You don't want to overreact too much. You don't want to take away that Florida State is terrible and they'll never get close to the playoff, or Georgia Tech is a playoff dark horse, or SMU is a team that's just not ready for the ACC. I don't want to get into all that. I don't want to get into all the overreactions, but what I can say is Florida State has a number of things to change when it comes to play calling, coaching, and motivation. What I can say is Georgia Tech did an incredible job when it comes to play calling, coaching, and motivation, and I can say that SMU just has to be more disciplined and has to find that quarterback. So all of those things feel pretty obvious coming out of that Week 0, and obviously there are a couple of reactions that aren't quite as obvious that people are making, but I like to stay away from those at least for the first couple of weeks. By like Week 2 or 3, maybe you'll start hearing me talking a little bit in absolutes about some of these teams. But as for right now, I think I'm going to give them just a little bit of leeway to get into this season, and then we'll see where they are about Week 3 or Week 4. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to do all my bold takes for the 2024 season. This is something that I just had forgotten to do, if I'm being totally honest with you. So I wanted to sneak it in here before Week 1 really got underway. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that.